Because when you say aid, it can sound like a small thing, but we're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars and pounds. So the big players in development are the United Nations, as you know. Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is V for V Memoirs, and also known as VM Coach. So today I want to start a video which is going to be kind of like a series, potentially going into a course, but I'll keep you guys updated on that one, which talks about what is the international development sector and what can you expect and why should you enter. So the international development sector is a sector that is basically covering all geographies. It covers across different regions. So this might include, actually includes the entire world. It doesn't actually include specific regions. It includes everybody. And it looks at how to improve the lives of the poor. It initially started with the Bretton Woods group, which is now known as the World Bank and IMF group. There's a few others joined as well. And that was somewhere right after World War One or World War Two. Now I'm thinking about it, I think it was World War Two. And they were really looking to see how they could improve the lives of those affected by the war and basically reconstruct cities and countries after the war. So that was really the idea, is trying to give out loans and grants and concessional loans, which is basically cheap loans, to try and support people who cannot, who don't have. And this was mainly targeted in Europe. But however, this then developed into another model, which basically looks at how we can use that same model to support countries that are poor. After that whole phase of countries from Europe being developed from this grant and loans, they then said, oh, this is actually quite profitable, one, and two, quite rewarding to try and do this for countries that are struggling. So initially, the big pioneers were kind of Europe and USA, and then later on, a lot of the Asian countries joined as well as donors. So what they usually do is they give a form of aid. This can be quite a big amount actually, because when you say aid, it can sound like a small thing, but we're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars and pounds. I'm going into countries specifically to try and support them in their development journey and development goals. The first common one, of which for you guys who do know anything about development, is what they call the budget support. Countries, donors such as like the UK or Germany or America, USAID, would go in and basically say, we can give you this amount in your budget this year, and we would need you just to make sure that you perform in these levels. And they're all kind of development goals, KPIs. So I'm not going to try and go into this without talking about the issues, of course, but we all know that development has major issues, particularly when it comes to discussions related to sort of neo-colonialism. But for now, I'm just kind of defining it. So for those who don't know what the development sector is, for you to just get more informed and then give you some links to read up some more as well. So as I said, so this is about aid, giving aid to countries that are less developed and less able to develop their country. Perhaps they don't have the right human capital, which is basically resources in human, to try and build either physical capital like roads and buildings, or intellectual property capital. So this is more like building knowledge, inventions, and so on. There isn't enough resources and capacity in country to try and do that. Development has evolved over time quite a bit. So at the moment, there's various ways of which money and funding is resourced into countries. It's not just budget support like it used to be. Now you have like climate funds, which they look at a specific topic and they look at impact. And then countries and donors particularly will go in and basically commit some money to put into that climate fund, and then accessing that fund would mean that whoever country is applying will need to comply with some of the conditions that probably relate to environmental and climate. So the big players in development are the United Nations, as you know. They're the ones who are really responsible for making sure that countries are getting along politically, as well as making sure that things are moving in terms of development-wise. The other big players are the World Bank Group, and this obviously includes the IMF, the International Growth Center, the International Monetary Fund. There are also other big players, so these include foundations such as the Rockefeller Foundation, as you might come across, as well as the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. So if you're confused what a foundation is, a foundation is basically an organization formed from a private sector arm that the private sector is now committing to basically put some money in for funding a particular cause or funding a third sector. So they open up a third arm charity trust, which then they put in money, and that's purely used for development purposes and charity purposes. So for example, for me right now, I work for a foundation which is called Gatsby Africa. The private sector arm parent is what we know as Sainsbury's, which is the UK chain, which is like the second biggest shopping chain in the UK after Tesco's. And they decided then to put a charity trust fund, which funds different various projects in the UK, but one arm of it is Africa, looking at African sector development, sector transformation. But you also have NGOs, of which are a smaller element. So basically have donors, which is basically the bilaterals UK and Germany and Ireland and all these different countries in US. And they usually fund. They're the ones who commission and fund things. And they have their own projects, but it's all kind of done in a system that is looking at procuring projects down into implementing partners and so on. You might have then a level which is the foundations, which are very similar. They have their own money, but they get their money from private sector, whereas the bilateral donors get the money from government. Again, they also would either implement themselves or will fund through commissioning and through procurement. And then you have NGO level, and even NGO might have another level there where you consider that the NGO might commission a specific project to someone below, or they might actually implement themselves. So the likes of the Innovation Poverty Action, IPA, are known as an NGO, and they implement research, and they get funded by different funders such as Bill Melinda Gates and so on, to basically run randomized control trials in countries and see the impact of policy and programs. And then you might also have like the likes of the International Growth Center, which is what I mentioned for my previous video, the IGC, and they are an NGO that does research purely, but they then commission specific research projects that researchers, PI, principal investigators, do. So it's trying to gather together a network of researchers to implement research, but also disseminate research. So NGOs have their own sort of mandates and different goals and agendas. They're not all the same. And the way they're set up depends on the country they're in. Working in international development is incredibly rewarding. It involves working in a lot of economic impoverished areas and finding ways to improve their livelihoods, either through education, information, or training. Sometimes also involves like building sort of their infrastructure as well. The types of job in this sector you might include, it could be education, so you could work in the education sector, sort of working in how education is run, sort of training teachers and so on. It could be in health, so you have a lot of healthcare officers and doctors sort of going into development, supporting clinics in poor countries, setting up their own clinics, and so on. You can also have human rights, so sort of making sure that their voices are heard, making sure that the civil movements are set up properly, and you can also have sort of infrastructure and economic development. So again, each NGO and each international organization will have their own mandate on where they want to focus mainly. And then what you normally find in most countries is that you have either in government or within the donor community is a coordinating unit or coordinating team which will look at which donors and which organizations are working in which areas. It's quite a fulfilling job in a sense that it always does feel like you're working towards something. Like it's different from working in profit, and causing that I've never worked for private sector, but I would imagine it feels different working for private sector because you're constantly thinking about performance and KPIs. Whereas working for development is always usually to do with the fact that you need to get something out that will support a certain agenda, a goal that's going to support someone who is poor. The issue is it might not directly get to that person, and there's tons of issues in terms of implementation and administration and the way that programs are run that sometimes is actually not that effective. But I guess in terms of thinking about what you want to achieve in your role when you're working in development, is usually very clear. So just some stats for you to kind of understand why development is important. 10% of the world population, 700 million people, live in extreme poverty, and I think this stat might have changed. So at the moment, the line they're using is the $1.90 a day. I think sometimes the World Bank uses the $2.15 a day. That might change depending on COVID as well, because COVID might have changed a lot of people and pushed them back into poverty. But again, 700 million people is a lot of people to be poor, and for us people like living in the UK, living whatever, just sitting there and do nothing. I strongly encourage you, if you are working already in the third sector in the UK, that you consider, especially if you're a diaspora, going back to your country and working, even if it's for like 2 or 3 years, in your country in a specific NGO or maybe private sector, but you're working in development, and then just to get that exposure because it's very different and it's quite rewarding. Another stat: in 2020, 2 billion people lacked access to safely managed drinking water. So there's a big program on water called WASH, and a lot of donors and NGOs fund it. It's actually one of the biggest programs going. I think even with US aid, I think that's one of their biggest programs, which means that, without water, like it's impossible to live. So again, what are these 2 billion people doing without water? So it's a huge issue. There's a crazy demand to try and fix this. Globally, it's said that 35% of 736 million women are experiencing sexual violence with a partner or non-partner. So again, development also looks at sort of issues in the social fabric of life. So it's not just about people who are poor, but people who are vulnerable, so disabled, women, children, sort of like child labor and things like that. It looks into that and see how they can sort of improve that in terms of policy making, in terms of programming, in terms of interventions, and so on. It's a very crazy area to work in because obviously you will face these people facing those struggles, and you have to be pretty damn strong to be going into work every day and looking into that. But also, like I said, rewarding if you have the heart. And also, 263 million children, adolescents, and youth are not currently in school because of course, some developing countries don't have enough resources to build enough schools for kids, and some it's because they're privatized, so you have to pay for school to access it. This becomes a problem for many, many families. So again, a lot of the NGOs trying to help with that by trying to make sure the schools is accessible or making homeschooling an option. Now, before I finish this video, I do want to say that there probably is another video I'll do, which I'll discuss the issues and challenges in working in development, particularly when it comes to funding structure and the short-term limitness of it, as well as the dependency. I'm sure most of you have come across, if you are interested in development, have come across the Mr. Moyo, who wrote the book Dead Aid, and it discusses this dependency issue with countries not having to do anything because they know that money will be coming in from either the West or from donors. It becomes a particular problem for governments not being accountable. So there's a lot of run-of issues with being development, as well as the fact that implementations usually doesn't always get to the people. And yeah, it does frustrate a lot of the workers in development. But just gonna give you a nuance of that in a different video. Alright guys, thank you for watching. This has been a very interesting video. I hope you found it really interesting and I hope you've developed a new crave for development, at least just for reading for now. Like I said, my idea here is trying to promote diasporas to go back to their country and really think about this as one of their core mission in life. I definitely thought so. I don't think you need to particularly work in the development sector in the donor space to be effective. I think you can go back and start a business, you can go back and work in private sector, and you can start your own thing. So it's not entirely to say that, the USAID and the World Banks are the way to go. It's just to say that there is a problem, and I think that me as a diaspora, I felt that, and I do encourage a lot of other youth to try and do the same. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next video. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the alert button for any videos coming in the future, and look forward to you next time.